understanding that family estrangement can be a functional and or healthy response to an extraordinarily unhealthy circumstance within your family, I think is the first or step, both for this community, people who are actually affected by it and feel either judged or shamed, or they feel guilty, or they feel that they've done something wrong, or that they feel bad, but they may have made the most functional, healthy decision in the context of what they were living in.
This is the Bad Mothers Podcast, where we dive deep into our maternal urges, or lack thereof. We talk about the mothers we left or who left us, and whether they haunt our own choices about having children. Before we begin, I have a request. For the final episode of the season, I'd like to host a Q&A. So if you have questions for me about estrangement or being child-free, please email monicacardenas@substack.com. We can of course keep all questions anonymous, but if you're comfortable doing so, feel free to send your question as a voice memo that I can play on the podcast. Today I'm sharing my interview with Angel Cassin. Angel's the chief executive of Together Estranged, an international nonprofit supporting adults who are estranged from their families. I've divided our conversation into two parts. Today's episode is focused on the practicalities of estrangement, alternative ways to frame our emotions around it, and the work of Together Estranged. Be sure to check out the resources in the show notes. Next week, I'll share the rest of my conversation with Angel, focused on her own experience of estrangement and motherhood. We can kick off with you telling us a little bit about what Together Estranged is.
So, Together Estranged is an international nonprofit that supports estranged adult children, and we operate entirely online. So, we're a virtual support community, and we have about 3,000 members and 1,000 people in our private support forum. And we run 2 monthly support groups, which also obviously operate online. And then we have a whole host of other supportive, empowering, destigmatizing services and supports and collaborations that we offer, all free of charge to this community. And our mission is really about supporting, empowering, and destigmatizing in this space of family estrangement.
Wonderful. How long has Together Estranged been around?
Together Estranged was founded in 2020, so we are 5 this year, which is very exciting. And it was founded by Seth Forbes, a good friend of mine. I was a community member initially and then became involved as a volunteer and so on, and just progressed in my capacity in the organization. But yeah, 5 years this year.
Great. And you said you have 3,000 members now, and that's worldwide. Do you have any sense of demographics?
Sure. So, how we calculate membership is looking across our social media platforms and our support forums. So, it's a sort of, that's why I said it's about or estimated. So, we don't have people signing up for membership, we have people accessing our platforms. Although we do have a newsletter subscription as well, so people can keep up to date with what we're offering. Sorry, you were saying about demographics and where people are coming from. So we were founded in the US. And so for that reason, our primary base of community members is still located in the US. But because it was a digital world and because people are looking for this kind of support globally, it started to expand and expand in different places. So we can see, like, in terms of the main cohorts, or like our top 3 or 4 countries of membership, we're looking at the United States, we're looking at the UK, we're looking at Canada, Australia, and Ireland. So we have a pretty global or international membership, and it's expanding all the time. And we're seeing people request different time zones for meetings because they're located in different parts of the world. So it's just always growing everywhere.
In what ways do you see society making estrangement more difficult for adults or adult children? I know that's the focus for Together Estranged. When we say adult children, that's adults who have decided to become estranged from their parents. So in what ways can do these people suffer, I guess? Has society made it difficult?
Okay. Yeah, so there's a couple different parts to that, I think. The first is that estrangement to begin with, family estrangement to begin with, is really hard because it's a grief, it's a loss, even if it's a decision. And I think a lot of people who are in this community would say, yes, I did decide this or I chose this, but they would often follow that up with, but I didn't feel like I had a choice. The circumstances were so extreme and difficult that the decision, in a sense, was made for me. So
Mhm.
that is an incredibly challenging situation to be in. And unfortunately, then when you share that information, or if you choose to share that information with others who aren't part of the community, who don't understand, there is an awful lot of shaming done because family is seen as the pinnacle of normality, like, mum and dad and kids. Now, I know people's expansion of their understanding of family or how they define family has definitely shifted and it's much broader, but loyalty to the family unit is definitely very, very important for a lot of people. And so people face this judgment and shaming when they choose to share that they're estranged from their family. So there's that aspect of it, which is owning the experience, whether it's decision made for you, like because some people don't actually make the decision to become estranged, but just by being who they are or identifying as who they are causes family to estrange them. And then there's the interaction that people have with that decision or situation. But then there's all the ramifications of estrangement, which go far beyond the decision and the personal sense of loss or grief that somebody might feel being disconnected from their kind of fundamental family of origin or that like fundamental kind of support network, even if it's very challenging or damaging or abusive. And that is the administration around estrangement. So paperwork, paper trails, accessing services. If you don't have access to your information because you had to leave your family who hold that information, it's incredibly challenging then to pursue an independent life separate to them if you don't have your birth certificate, if you don't have your medical history, and if it's difficult to obtain that information without some circuitous route. But you also see the ramifications of not having that social support network of a family in things like housing. So, access to housing, homelessness, challenge of getting a guarantor in some situations where you need one, or that financial safety net that some people experience in family where they know that, okay, no matter how challenging the relationship was, well, I knew that, my parent would always sort of fork up some money out if I was really stuck or I didn't have something that I really needed. Um, and as I said, then you have that sort of social expectation of others that you'll be going home somewhere that is family oriented on
Mhm.
holidays. So it's the social side of things and the very practical side of things, and then the very personal side of things. And they look different for everybody, and everybody's estrangement is slightly different. While there are common themes, those are some of the things that we see people experiencing. Personal challenges, mental health challenges, social challenges and connection and understanding, and then those very practical administrative challenges that you're faced when you're disconnected from your information HQ of their family.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So the tagline for Together Estranged is support, empower, destigmatize.
Mm.
You described some of the ways that you support and empower by, the support groups and advice on those more practical challenges. What do we do to destigmatize estrangement?
Great question. And I have to say, that's not altogether straightforward. But and and I would say that's because destigmatizing implies there's an interaction or a receptiveness to understanding more about what estrangement is or family estrangement is. We had Dr. Sharon Martin on our event series earlier this year, and she was sharing about her new book. And as part of that conversation, she mentioned having a more functional view of family and then a more functional view of family estrangement. That is critical factor for destigmatizing estrangement. So what did we mean about that when we were having that conversation? And that is like understanding that family isn't chosen and understanding that there are lots of dynamics going on between family members um, because of a history of how you relate to each other within a family culture. And then if there's any other external challenges or instances of abuse or neglect and so on. And so understanding that family estrangement can be a functional and or healthy response to an extraordinarily unhealthy circumstance within your family, I think is the first
Mm-hmm.
or step, both for this community, people who are actually affected by it and feel either judged or shamed, or they feel guilty, or they
Mm-hmm.
feel that they've done something wrong, or that they feel bad. But they may have made the most functional, healthy decision in the context of what they were living in. And I think that's very, very difficult for people to accept who haven't been affected by this, because it is incomprehensible to them that you would separate yourself from family. And that may be because they're lucky enough to have such a functional or healthy or supportive family dynamic that and they believe in the notion that family should do that, that it's incomprehensible to them that that doesn't exist for others, or that they don't believe it's bad enough, which you often hear, like you must tolerate, you must learn, you must compromise. And sometimes that bandwidth of compromise and tolerance, it would be just far too big for any
Mm-hmm.
human being to survive. So I think that first and foremost, like understanding that kind of foundational thing, that we can have a more functional and reasonable view of family, and therefore why family estrangement happens, and start the conversation from that point. But then in terms of our actual activities around family estrangement to really push forward that destigmatization progress, I think it's having conversations like this. I think it's about getting out in public fora. It's about media coverage that's more nuanced, which we are seeing slowly but surely
Mm-hmm.
happening. And it's having difficult conversations where we feel able with people who don't know about family estrangement. So I found in my role um, leading Together Estranged over the last year, and putting myself out there both with people I don't know and with people I do know, sharing more about my experience and what I'm doing. And that's maybe because I have an in now. Oh, what are you doing these days? And I can tell them about Together Estranged, and it's sort of at a distance. And then they ask, well, how did you get involved with that? And then I share a little bit about myself and my story. But I do think it is about getting to talk to more people and creating a human side of it, so that there isn't this vilification or this ostracization of people who are affected by it, given that it is such a common experience, sadly. And I think that's all part of the picture around destigmatization. Like, this is something that happens and it has
Yeah.
always happened. So, how can we talk about it healthily, understand people, support people, and find more functional and healthy ways in society to talk and heal about it?
Yeah. Going back to the nuance you described, um, like so many really personal choices that we make, I see this happening over and over again. There's never any room for nuance because the other side of whatever debate it is always waiting for that little bit of daylight to push through and prove their side of things. So I worry that there's not space in these conversations to be really honest. For example, to say, I'm estranged, but I'm really sad about it. And sometimes I miss my parent. But that doesn't mean that it would be healthy for me to have a relationship with them, right? Sometimes you just miss the comfort that comes from, being with someone who raised you. even though that might come with lots of strings, right? That's not something I feel like I can say in these forums without someone else coming back and saying, well, why don't you call your mom? Um, and I
Yeah.
think we often hear also, you mentioned the media environment. We hear the other side, the parent side, so much more often.
Yeah.
And they often portray themselves as victims who've been abandoned by their kids and they don't understand why. So finding that balance between these two sides, I think, is important. And I guess, how do you think we should respond to those parents who are who maybe, if I mean, if I'm speaking from my perspective, I believe that my mom probably doesn't understand why we don't speak because she just isn't capable of understanding the unhealthiness of our dynamic. But so there's no way of explaining it to her, right? There's just no hope. So how do we sort of balance those conversations with some empathy maybe for the other side while maintaining our own safety and health?
Well, I think you've almost captured it there. It's acknowledging the limitations of the person and the relationship and the capacity within that to have a conversation. I think it's helpful to use comparisons that people understand or that more universal as well. I think it's incredibly emotive subject. And when you talk about parents losing children in any context, people's
Mhm.
heckles go up, their chest tightens. And understandably so. It's kind of,
Mhm.
again, it's like incomprehensible. How could this happen? And you see in a lot of the coverage, like, people really going, their pain, the pain of the parent, it must be immeasurable pain, like to lose, their child. But I think there's a lot of overtones of kind of ownership and identity and that, and like, who are they without their parenting hat? And I think that's a legacy of, how we have as a society structured families and also isolated families, separated them from villages and communities and made the unit the be all and end all. Um, and so being raised by a village isn't so common anymore, and I think it puts inordinate pressure on people to perform in a way that's probably unsustainable. But that's just an
Mhm.
aside. But it's kind of acknowledging those limitations in a way and saying that we can, that we, as you've said, we cannot have a conversation with somebody who hasn't got the capacity to view things beyond the scope of their own experience, which I think would be quite common for a lot of people in this community. They're like, I can't explain in any language to my parent why what they're doing is problematic or
Mhm.
why what they're doing is abusive. If they can't see it and I can't, the words I've used don't ring true or they debate them, this is an impossible dynamic, and a dynamic in which I keep being hurt or keep being abused or
Mhm.
keep having in massive recovery time. People external to those very intense interactions might say, all families are difficult and, family interactions are challenging and, generations these days, younger generations, they just don't have the compromise skills and the communication skills and, healthy bit of discomfort isn't a bad thing. I just think those phrases that people throw out, they don't apply in a lot of circumstances.
Right.
And to assume that efforts haven't already been made to engage on a level of genuine, authentic, effort to communicate,
Mhm.
assuming that that hasn't been done, I think is unfair. And I also think coming into this, it's also acknowledging like the power differential, which I think a lot of media coverage doesn't. You know, they assume that because this debate is between an adult child and an adult parent, that you can put the same terms and conditions as you would against two equal partners. And that does not take account for the historical context where there was a significant power differential that came to
Mhm.
play in pretty much every interaction. It doesn't just go away when you turn 18 or 20 or 40.
Mhm.
Um, and I just think that it's just so difficult for people to acknowledge that their terms and conditions and their dynamics in their family don't apply to every family and every dynamic. And it's people want there to be an answer. They want there to be reconciliation at any cost, because that is seen as the ultimate outcome. But like, a resolution for a lot of people isn't actually reconciliation. It's just being able to reconcile their experience with their feelings and their body,
Right.
and come out the other side of it feeling like they can live a fulfilling life, and have healthy relationships that do involve compromise and healthy communication, and like be able to live that life. Um, so I think it's very challenging for people, as we say, on the outside, to interpret these kind of dynamics if what they have grown up and observed has been healthier or more functional. And because there's an underlying assumption that at a baseline you can have a conversation with that parent or that other person. And for a lot of us, that's just not possible. And it's incredibly hurtful and damaging in the long run to continue to try. And all the rest of your life melts away as the energy is channeled into this interaction after interaction that ultimately does not lead for your parent to be happy either. And certainly not for you. So,
Right.
yeah, that's kind of where I land on that.
Thank you. That was a great response. Thank you. Um, and we're going to leave it there for today. Next week, I'll share the rest of my conversation with Angel, where we hear more about her personal story of estrangement. And for our final episode of the season, I'd like to answer your questions. If you have a question for me, please email it to monicacardenas@substack.com. We'll keep everything anonymous, but if you're comfortable, feel free to send your question as a voice memo that I can play on the show. I look forward to hearing from you. Bad Mothers is written, produced, and edited by me, Monica Cardenas. I'd love it if you'd rate and review the show and get in touch with any feedback. You can find me on my Substack, and guess what? It's called Bad Mothers too.